Welcome to This Day in His Story, created by American Heritage Worldwide. A reminder that every day holds something new to learn. Did you know that the Nauvoo Expositor newspaper had a major impact on history with only one published issue that increased rising tensions and encouraged violence against the prophet Joseph Smith? Learn how growing conflict, public criticism, and legal accusations led Joseph and his brother Hyrum to be held in jail where they were attacked and killed by an armed mob. Discover that, shortly before his death, Joseph declared, "I am going like a lamb to the slaughter, but I am calm as a summer's morning." I want you to picture something very specific in your mind's eye today. Imagine a pocket watch.
Oh, like an old 19th century timepiece.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
The kind with a heavy, solid metal casing and a really delicate glass face. Now imagine that watch is suddenly and violently struck by a heavy lead musket ball.
Wow.
Or maybe it's smashed hard against a wooden windowsill during this frantic, desperate attempt to escape an armed mob. The glass shatters instantly, right?
Right, the whole thing would just be ruined.
The delicate inner workings are utterly destroyed, and the hands of that watch freeze forever, locked in time at exactly 16 minutes and 26 seconds past 5 o'clock p.m.
It's an incredibly arresting image to start with.
Yeah.
I mean, we're looking at a literal moment, frozen in history, captured in twisted metal and broken gears.
And today we're doing a deep dive into the exact moment that specific watch stopped. We're going back to June 27, 1844, inside a cramped, suffocating room at Carthage Jail in Illinois.
Yeah, and our mission today is to explore the true, verified historical accounts of that day. We're looking at the precise details of the martyrdom of the prophet Joseph Smith and his brother Hyrum.
We really want to look at exactly how and why they sealed their testimonies with their lives on that summer afternoon.
To do this properly, we are drawing on foundational historical records. Our sources for today's deep dive include deeply documented factual accounts.
Right.
We'll be specifically highlighting Reed Blake's meticulous historical book, Martyrdom at Carthage, and we'll also look at recorded prophecies that literally mapped out the exact sequence of events long before they even happened.
Which is just wild to think about.
It really is. And I want to emphasize that every detail we're unpacking today is the historical truth of what occurred. Everything in our source material is factual.
Yeah.
But we aren't just looking at the mechanical timeline of a tragedy. We are examining why this single moment stands as an eternal witness for Jesus Christ.
So, as you listen today, I really want you to try and put yourself there. Imagine stepping back into the oppressive, sticky summer heat of 1844 Illinois.
Oh, that humidity is no joke.
No, it's not. You are standing on the dusty frontier streets, about to witness history unfold. But before we step inside the walls of that jail cell, we need to understand the gears that wound the clock to that specific moment.
Right, the buildup.
Yeah, like how did the prophet of the church and his brother end up trapped in a county jail surrounded by their enemies in the first place?
Well, to understand the mechanism of that trap, we have to look at the escalating opposition. By the summer of 1844, Hancock County had turned into a literal powder keg.
A total powder keg.
Hatred toward Joseph Smith and the church was reaching this absolute boiling point, fueled by all these political and religious tensions. The city of Nauvoo had grown so rapidly, it was rivaling Chicago in size.
Which obviously terrified the neighboring towns.
Exactly. But the spark that really ignited the final explosion happened on June 7. A group of apostate church members published the first and what turned out to be the only issue of a newspaper called the Nauvoo Expositor.
Okay, let's unpack this because I want to push back on this on behalf of modern listeners.
Sure.
When we hear that a city suppressed or destroyed a printing press, it immediately sounds like a massive violation of the First Amendment, you know?
Right. To our modern ears, it sounds drastic.
Yeah, it sounds super authoritarian. Why didn't they just sue them for libel? Why resort to something as extreme as destroying the actual physical press?
That is the essential question. And it really requires understanding how frontier law and frontier violence actually functioned in the 1840s.
Okay.
The source material shows us that the Nauvoo Expositor was not just a paper with a different editorial slant. It wasn't just bad press.
What was it then?
The paper was explicitly designed to incite immediate mob violence against the church and against the prophet personally. It called for the repeal of the Nauvoo City Charter,
Which was basically their only legal protection, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
The charter was the only thing standing between the citizens and the violent mobs that had already driven them out of Missouri years earlier.
Oh, wow. So this wasn't an opinion piece. It was like taking the lock off the door and handing the burglar a weapon, or more like a flare gun.
That is the perfect analogy. In the 1840s frontier, an inflammatory paper like that was literally a flare gun.
Wow.
Publishing it didn't just express an unpopular opinion, it signaled neighboring hostile militias to march on your town. So 3 days later, on June 10th, the Nauvoo City Council and Joseph Smith had to make a critical decision.
With Joseph acting in his official legal capacity as the mayor, right?
Yes, exactly. Relying on the legal standards of the day, specifically Blackstone's commentaries, which allowed for the removal of a public nuisance, they officially declared the newspaper a public nuisance.
Okay, so it was a legal proceeding.
It was. They legally ordered the destruction of the press to prevent an all-out war.
Which, ironically, is exactly what brought the war to their doorstep anyway.
Sadly, yes.
Because when you look at the historical record, the glaring double standard in how the state of Illinois responded to this is just staggering.
The hypocrisy of the state's response is one of the most frustrating mechanisms of this entire history.
Yeah, you have Illinois officials stepping in under the guise of keeping the peace, and their first move, they actually confiscate the state-issued firearms from the Nauvoo Legion.
Yeah, the city's official militia.
They completely disarm the people of Nauvoo. But at the exact same time, they deliberately allow the other local militias, the ones in neighboring towns who were openly hostile to the church, to keep all of their weaponry.
What's fascinating here is how quickly that hostility was formalized. We aren't talking about angry whispers in local taverns.
No, this was organized.
Very organized. Citizens in nearby towns like Warsaw and Carthage held formal mass meetings. They drafted and passed official resolutions declaring their unified intent to utterly exterminate the prophet Joseph Smith.
Utterly exterminate. That language is just chilling.
The language was absolute. And rather than protecting the disarmed citizens of Nauvoo from these publicly declared extermination threats, Illinois Governor Thomas Ford marched into Hancock County with more than 1,200 state militiamen.
1,200 armed men marching into a county where the local populace is actively calling for blood. It's just a recipe for disaster.
And the legal pretense used to justify arresting the prophet amidst all this mobilized aggression. The prophet's enemies brought charges against him and the Nauvoo City Council for inciting a riot.
Referring to the destruction of the expositor.
Exactly. That single, highly orchestrated charge is what legally forced Joseph, Hyrum, and the others to leave the safety of Nauvoo and travel to Carthage to stand trial.
Carthage being the very center of the anti-Mormon hostility.
Right into the lion's den.
So while 1,200 armed militiamen are swarming the county outside, the world suddenly shrinks down. We move from that massive, sweeping scale of armies and frontier politics down to a suffocatingly small, micro-level setting inside Carthage Jail.
The physical space contracts entirely. By the afternoon of June 27, 1844, we are looking at just 4 men in an upstairs bedroom of the county jail.
And it wasn't like a dungeon, right?
No, it was the jailer's bedroom. But in the dead heat of an Illinois summer, it was stifling. The historical account from Reed Blake's Martyrdom at Carthage details exactly who was in that room.
Okay, who was there?
You have Joseph Smith, 38 years old, the president of the church. You have his older brother, Hyrum, who was 44, the church patriarch.
Okay.
Then you have John Taylor, 35, the editor of 2 Nauvoo newspapers. And you have Willard Richards, 40, a physician and the prophet's personal secretary.
Just those 4 men holding the weight of an entire movement on their shoulders.
And there's a crucial historical detail regarding the specific presence of John Taylor and Willard Richards. They were the only 2 members of the quorum of the 12 apostles on the western frontier at that time.
Wait, really? Where was everyone else?
The other 10 members of the quorum were thousands of miles away, serving missions and campaigning in the eastern United States.
Oh, wow. Which means the entire future leadership of this massive religious movement was completely bottlenecked in one vulnerable, unprotected room.
Exactly.
So if you're listening to this, I really want you to think about the psychology of that moment. You are sitting in an oppressively hot, sticky room.
Through your clothes.
Yeah. You know you've been disarmed. You know the local militia acting as your guard, the Carthage Greys, openly despises you.
Right.
You know there are over 1,000 militiamen in the area, and the surrounding towns have literally passed legal resolutions to exterminate you. The natural human instinct would be absolute panic.
Pure terror.
So how do you not panic? How do you keep your mind from shattering under that kind of psychological pressure?
It's a phenomenal question, and it really highlights the internal state of the prophet during his final days. Because the historical record shows us that Joseph did not succumb to panic.
He really didn't.
No, he possessed a profound, almost supernatural clarity about what was going to happen.
And we know this because of a documented prophecy he made just before arriving in Carthage.
Right, on the way there.
Yeah, on the way there, Joseph declared, and this is forever recorded in section 135 of the Doctrine and Covenants, he said, "I am going like a lamb to the slaughter, but I am calm as a summer's morning. I have a conscience void of offense towards God and towards all men."
Calm as a summer's morning. The juxtaposition between his internal spiritual peace and the external violence that was gathering outside those walls is just profound.
It really is.
And that calmness permeated the room, even as the heat and the tension grew heavy on the afternoon of June 27. To manage the suffocating atmosphere, they actually turned to music.
Yeah, John Taylor, who had a beautiful voice, sang a hymn called "Poor Wayfaring Man of Grief."
It's a deeply solemn, melancholic hymn about suffering and sacrifice.
And I try to put myself into John Taylor's shoes here. He finishes singing this heavy song, and it clearly struck a chord in the room because after he finishes, Hyrum actually asks him to sing it a second time.
But Taylor's response is so telling.
It's incredibly raw and relatable. He essentially tells Hyrum, "Brother Hyrum, I do not feel like singing."
Taylor felt the song was simply too much in accord with their heavy feelings. He was just emotionally exhausted.
He simply didn't have the emotional bandwidth left. I mean, the tension, the heat, the impending threat, the isolation, it was completely draining him.
Absolutely.
But then you have Hyrum's response, which is so gentle but firm. He says, "Oh, never mind. Commence singing, and you will get the spirit of it."
He encourages him to push through.
Yeah, to push through the sheer exhaustion, to find that spiritual grounding again. And so, relying on that encouragement, Elder Taylor sings the song a second time.
But that fragile peace established by the hymn was about to be violently shattered by the mechanics of the mob outside.
This is where things escalate so fast.
Incredibly fast. While they were singing, an armed mob of roughly 150 to 200 men was making its final approach to the jail.
A massive mob.
And the historical accounts give us a chilling, calculated detail about their preparation. On their way to Carthage, the mob stopped at a bank of mud. They took raw gunpowder, mixed it with the mud, and smeared it over their faces.
Oh my gosh, that is terrifying.
It's awful.
It's not just a disguise to hide their identities from the law. It's literal psychological warfare. It turns them into something monstrous before they even reach the building.
Exactly. And the transition from the quiet singing inside to the reality of the attack was brutal and immediate.
They just burst in.
Yeah, the mob easily bypassed the Carthage Greys guarding the jail, who, by the way, were entirely complicit in the attack, and stormed up the narrow stair.
Right up to the bedroom.
They reached the landing outside the door. Suddenly, the air was filled with shouting, cursing, and the deafening percussive sound of heavy gunfire.
And the mechanics of the room itself suddenly become a death trap. I mean, the door didn't even have a functioning latch to lock it.
No lock at all. They had to physically throw their bodies against the wooden door to hold it shut.
Just using their own weight.
Exactly. Musket balls began splintering right through the wood. And because these were 19th century black powder weapons being fired in an enclosed hallway, the smoke from the powder flashes instantly clouded the entire room.
Oh, I can't even imagine.
It added this blinding, choking, sulfurous element to the sheer confusion and adrenaline of the assault.
It's literally 4 men with walking sticks and 2 small pistols against a heavily armed mob thrusting musket barrels through the cracked door.
They were trying to beat down the rifle barrels with their canes.
But the sheer volume of fire makes it impossible to hold them off.
Right, and hoping to find some kind of safety or perhaps draw the mob away, John Taylor decides to make a desperate leap to the yard below.
Towards the window.
He crosses the room, but just as he reaches the open window, a musket ball, fired from the doorway, strikes him squarely in the thigh.
He loses all his leverage and falls heavily across the wide wooden windowsill, completely unable to move.
The accounts say he cried out, "I am shot."
And this is the exact mechanism we discussed at the very beginning of the deep dive. As he collapses violently against the sill, the immense physical impact strikes the pocket watch in his breast pocket.
The force of the impact completely destroys the inner works of the timepiece. The delicate gears lock.
The hands freeze instantly.
Yes. And that is how history knows. With absolute, unyielding mechanical precision, the exact second of the martyrdom. 16 minutes and 26 seconds past 5 o'clock.
But the tragedy doesn't stop with the ticking of that watch. Joseph sees what is happening. He sees Taylor fall, completely helpless on the sill.
And Joseph makes the ultimate conscious sacrifice.
He does.
He drops his own pistol. He knows the mob is firing blindly into the room, trying to hit anyone in the thick smoke. So in a deliberate, calculated attempt to draw the mobbers' attention and their gunfire entirely away from the others inside the room, Joseph rushes to the window.
He jumps right onto the ledge,
exposing himself completely to the men in the yard and the men at the door. It was an intentional act to pull the aggression toward himself to save his friends.
Wow.
And the moment he poised on the sill, he was struck from both sides simultaneously. 2 musket balls fired from the mob at the door hit him in the back, and a third ball, fired by the mob outside in the yard, hit him in the chest.
He pauses there on the sill for just a fraction of a second. He cries out, "Oh, Lord, my God!" And then he falls to the yard below, dead.
After the deafening roar of the gunfire, after the shouting and the blinding thick powder smoke, a sudden, eerie stillness falls over the jail.
Just total silence.
The mob, realizing they've accomplished their goal, immediately scatters in a panic, fearing retribution. The entire siege is over in less than 3 minutes.
3 minutes? That's so fast.
It is. Willard Richards, the large, robust physician, is still inside the smoke-filled room. He slumps to the floor, completely exhausted, surrounded by the devastating tragedy.
And as he sits there in the ringing silence, checking himself over, he realizes something practically impossible given the volume of lead that just tore through that tiny room.
Right.
He hasn't been shot.
He's completely uninjured,
Really?
Not a single scratch. As he realizes this, his mind immediately flashes back to a very specific conversation he had with Joseph Smith over a year prior.
Wait, Joseph prophesied about this.
He did. Joseph had prophesied directly to Willard Richards. He told him that the time would come when balls would fly around him like hail and his friends would fall dead by his side, but that his robe would not receive a single hole.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because let's pause and look at the layers of what just happened.
Okay.
We've been talking about precision. We have the absolute mechanical precision of John Taylor's shattered pocket watch, stopping the hands of time to mark a historical assassination down to the very second.
Right.
But layered right on top of that, you have the absolute divine precision of the prophet's foresight. I mean, over a year in advance, he predicts an impossibly specific outcome.
Bullets flying like hail in an enclosed space.
Criminals falling dead at his feet. And a large man like Richards not having a single hole in his clothing. And in the bloody, smoke-filled aftermath of Carthage Jail, that prophecy is fulfilled with the exact same undeniable precision as the stopped watch.
It is a remarkable testament to the factual truth of the historical record and the prophetic calling of Joseph Smith. The events of June 27, 1844, fundamentally changed the trajectory of American religious history.
It really did.
When the news of the prophet's death spread across the frontier, the accounts say a few thousand wept in Nauvoo. It was a localized, devastating mourning for a very young church that many assumed would simply collapse without its founder.
But it didn't collapse.
Not at all. Look at the mechanism of that legacy today. What started with a few thousand weeping pioneers on the edge of the frontier has grown into a global legacy where millions upon millions of people across the world now sing the words, "Praise to the man who communed with Jehovah."
So what does this all mean for us today? The source material we're looking at highlights beautiful modern tributes that capture this enduring legacy.
Yes, very powerful ones.
Specifically, there are video tributes that feature the resonant words of the late Elder Neil L. Maxwell set to the music of that very hymn, Praise to the Man, playing alongside the incredible, historically grounded artwork of Liz Lemon Swindle.
They're gorgeous tributes.
These tributes exist because the impact of that day didn't just end on the dusty ground outside Carthage Jail. The shockwaves of that moment echo all the way down to us right now.
The martyrdom was not an end. It was a sealing. They literally signed their witness of the Book of Mormon and the restored gospel of Jesus Christ with their own blood.
Yeah.
That is a massive weight of historical and spiritual evidence that demands deep reflection.
And that is exactly where we want to leave you today. We've walked through the complex frontier politics, the legal mechanics of the printing press, the suffocating heat of the room, and the exact second the watch stopped.
Right.
But the final question isn't about knowing the history. It's about what you do with it. What does Joseph Smith's ultimate sacrifice actually mean to you personally?
How does the reality of what happened in Carthage shape your own faith, your own resilience?
Exactly. Our sources encourage you to take this question and actually discuss your thoughts with a parent, a mentor, or a friend. Don't just let the history sit in your head like an old fact talk about what its implications mean for your life today.
It's a conversation worth having, especially when you consider the profound internal peace Joseph carried in such a terrifying, chaotic situation.
Which brings us to one final thought for you to mull over. We talked about Joseph declaring on his way to Carthage that his conscience was void of offense towards God and towards all men.
That phrase is so powerful.
It is. That absolute clarity of conscience is how he faced down a mob of hundreds without panicking. So, as you go about your week, I want you to ask yourself, how does clearing your own conscience of all offense, truly letting go of anger, making things right with God, and resolving conflicts with the people around you completely change the way you face your own personal storms and fears?
That's a great question.
Because if you can find that kind of deep internal peace, then even when the glass shatters and time stops, you can remain as calm as a summer's morning.
Thank you for joining us for this day in his story. May the lessons of yesterday inspire you to see God's hand today and to play your part in his story now. For more faith-based learning, visit ahsworldwide.org, the homeschool for faith and family.